No one imagined that a plain piece of bread and a single glass of water could ignite a firestorm. But when the CEO stepped onto his first-class flight to New York, he wasn't just taking a seat, he was stepping into a moment that would shake the foundations of an entire industry. When the flight attendant placed the sparse meal in front of him with a cutting remark, "This is what you get," the cabin went quiet, discomfort hanging thick in the air. By sunrise, the man they had dismissed didn't just hold a boarding pass, he held controlling interest in the airline itself. And with it, he rewrote the rules. What started as a subtle insult became a public reckoning, one that would force a long-avoided conversation into the spotlight. Some revolutions arrive with sirens. This one arrived with silence and a camera. But before we dive deeper, I want to know, where are you watching from today? And if stories like this move you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is something you'll definitely want to see. Julian Cross zipped his suitcase slowly, the rhythmic sound of the zipper oddly comforting against the quiet hum of dawn. The soft golden light of the San Francisco morning leaked through the blinds, brushing over the photos on his bedroom wall, his daughter's graduation, the Etherlink team's first IPO celebration, a candid shot of him laughing beside his late wife. Moments of pride and pain, frozen in time. Downstairs, the car was waiting. At 42, Julian was no stranger to travel. As the CEO of Etherlink Systems, a rising star in aviation tech, he'd spent the past 2 years finalizing a landmark acquisition deal with a major airline. What the public didn't know was that this merger gave him far more than influence. It gave him oversight, access, control. And today's flight wasn't just another business trip to Washington, D.C. It was a test, a quiet, strategic quality audit conducted in secret. Only his assistant, Layla, knew the full extent. No press, no entourage. Just Julian, dressed in a charcoal hoodie, clean jeans, and well-worn sneakers, flying as himself. Not as a billionaire, not as a headline, just a man who wanted to see what passengers like him experienced when the name on their boarding pass didn't carry weight. He kissed the framed photo of his daughter, slid his phone into his pocket, and stepped into the cool air outside. "Morning, Mr. Cross," said Theo, his longtime driver, opening the back door of the Blacktown car. Julian offered a soft nod. "Let's do this." San Francisco International buzzed with its usual symphony luggage wheels scraping across tiles, overhead announcements looping like mantras, and the quiet frustration of early travelers navigating delays and detours. At the first-class counter, Julian approached with the calm, unhurried demeanor of someone who had nothing to prove. The woman behind the desk barely looked up. Blonde bob, tight red lips, name tag reading Tammy. "Yes," she asked, not unkindly, but without warmth. "Julian Cross," he said simply, handing over his ID and platinum status card. Her eyes glanced from his ID to his hoodie, then back again. The shift in her expression was subtle, barely there, but Julian noticed. He always noticed. "Coaches to your left," she said, almost by reflex. "I'm flying first," he replied, his voice steady but polite. A beat. She looked again, this time slower. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Her eyes flicked back up. "Right," she muttered, the faintest hint of disbelief threading her voice. "Gate B19. Boarding in 40. Julian nodded, taking back his documents with quiet grace. As he turned to leave, he caught the smallest twitch in her lip and almost smirk. He'd seen it before. He walked past a promotional desk where staff offered champagne and lounge passes to sharply dressed white businessmen. One of them glanced at Julian and smiled faintly, more curiosity than kindness. The staff, however, said nothing to him. He kept walking. At the security line, a white man in his 70s struggled with his suitcase. Without hesitation, Julian stepped forward and lifted it gently onto the belt. "Thank you, young man," the man said. Surprised, Julian smiled. "Safe travels." From behind, he caught the glance of a couple whispers exchanged. One of them glanced at his hoodie and nodded slightly, as if confirming an assumption. Probably thinks I'm a porter, Julian thought. No matter. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reality. About seeing, really seeing, what the system looked like from a seat with no title. No shield of recognition. And if that meant absorbing a few stares and slights, so be it. As he settled into the terminal, he pulled out his tablet and opened the encrypted dashboard of Etherlink's proprietary audit app. Today's flight, AX1184, was already tagged for internal review. He smiled to himself. No one on that plane knew who he really was. Not yet. Julian boarded the flight with the calm of a man who'd walked through boardrooms, war zones, and empty hotel lobbies at 2 a.m. He was used to discomfort, used to suspicion, but there was something sharper about what greeted him on that jet bridge. A chill not from the air conditioning, but from eyes that flicked too quickly over him, as if calculating his worth in milliseconds. He stepped into the first-class cabin and immediately felt it. That pause in the flight attendant's smile, that subtle shift in posture, that look that says, "Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" Her name tag read, Monica Delaney. Her blonde bun was tight, her uniform crisp. She held a tray of welcome drinks and moved through the cabin with rehearsed warmth until she reached Julian. The smile faded. Just a blink, but it was gone. "Boarding pass, sir," she asked, though no one else had been asked. Julian met her eyes and handed it over silently. 2A, she said, voice clipped, scanning the seat behind him just to be sure. "Right this way." She didn't offer champagne, didn't offer the hot towel the other passengers received, just turned and walked ahead, her heels echoing on the cabin floor. Julian followed and took his seat by the window, setting his carry-on in the overhead bin and placing his tablet into the seat pocket. He didn't react. Not visibly. He had learned long ago that silence was often more disarming than anger. The cabin slowly filled with passengers. Most were older, white, dressed in suits or polished travel wear. A few gave Julian a second glance, long enough to be noticed, short enough to pretend it was just curiosity. One man, in his 60s, with thick silver hair and an expensive watch, actually leaned into his companion and whispered just loud enough, "Must be a loyalty upgrade." Julian smiled faintly to himself. "No, I bought the whole damn plane." He turned to the window, watching the baggage handlers below loading carts. Behind him, a younger white man in a navy suit was loudly joking with another passenger about stock prices and lazy diversity hires. He wasn't even trying to whisper. The flight attendants passed by with flutes of champagne, checking in with each row. Monica moved through with practiced ease offering options, making light conversation until she got to Julian. She skipped him. Not even a glance. Julian looked straight ahead. Let the moment land. Let it float. He wasn't alone in noticing it. Across the aisle, a woman with a laptop on her tray table blinked, processing what she'd seen. She wore black-rimmed glasses, a loose tan coat over travel slacks. Her eyes met Julian's briefly, then dropped to her keyboard. She typed something. Julian settled into his seat. No outburst, no confrontation. He simply opened his phone, snapped a photo of the cabin menu and someone else's seat back, then placed his phone screen down on the tray. A moment later, he received a message. Layla, 7:31 a.m., security monitoring live. Flight path and crew behavior logging initiated. Skytrace is active. Do you want audio flagging enabled? He typed back with one hand. Julian, yes. Quiet mode. Tag all interactions around 2A. Monica returned to serve the row behind him. Champagne, warm nuts, jokes about turbulence. She skipped 2A again. The woman across the aisle, a journalist named Nina Caldwell, though Julian didn't know that yet, watched her with an expression slowly sharpening into something between disbelief and interest. The plane took off. The rumble of wheels against tarmac gave way to a smooth rise into cloudlight. Julian leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, and let gravity fall away. Until the meal service came. Good afternoon, Monica said to the white man in 2B. We have herb-crusted salmon, filet mignon, or a vegan risotto. What can I get you? The man chose the steak. She moved to the next passenger and repeated the options. When she got to Julian, she didn't say anything. She simply placed a tray in front of him. A clear plastic cup of water. One dry slice of bread. No utensils. No napkin. No explanation. Julian stared at it. He didn't speak. Not yet. Monica leaned in slightly. This meal fits you, she said under her breath, just loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. The silence that followed was visceral. Even the white man next to Julian blinked in discomfort. Nina's eyes widened behind her glasses. Her fingers paused on her laptop keyboard. She looked at the bread, then at Julian, then back at Monica, who had already moved on as if nothing had happened. Julian reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. He snapped a photo of the tray, then he turned the phone subtly toward Monica's retreating back. One more click. Zoom on the name tag. He sent the photos. Julian, 7:58 a.m. Send these to legal and PR. Subject preliminary misconduct. Flight AX-84. He looked up. Nina leaned slightly toward him across the aisle. That was completely unacceptable, she said in a low voice. Julian gave a small nod. Thank you for noticing. She offered her hand. Nina. He shook it. Julian. There was kindness in her eyes, but also curiosity. The kind that said, this isn't just another rude flight attendant story. Is it she wasn't wrong? An hour into the flight, Julian hadn't been approached once. No refill, no towel, nothing. Meanwhile, the other passengers received their second glasses of wine, chocolate truffles, and personalized greetings. A couple of businessmen were even given a tour of the cockpit. Nina typed quietly. Julian checked his app. Skytrace was pinging keywords, not one of us. Probably a mistake. Don't waste the filet. Audio logs backed by timestamps. He flagged each one. Then his phone buzzed. Layla, 8:13 a.m. anonymous passenger recording uploaded to Twitter. Caption, first class. Dry bread. You tell me what this is. The story was already moving. Julian didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need revenge. He needed the truth to speak for itself. And on this flight, it already had a voice. The cabin lights had dimmed slightly, casting a soft glow over first class. Conversations dipped to a low murmur. Some passengers scrolled lazily on tablets. Others leaned back, sipping wine or pretending to sleep. But not Julian. He hadn't touched the bread. It sat there like a silent accusation, dry, pale, and deliberately chosen. Not just for what it was, but for what it meant. Across the aisle, Nina was watching him again, not out of pity, but something closer to quiet respect. She could sense something beneath his composed exterior, a current running deeper than inconvenience. She leaned closer. "You're documenting this, aren't you?" Julian didn't look at her as he replied, his voice low but clear. "Always." "In the galley," Monica whispered to Lars, the junior attendant. "Something's off," she said. "He hasn't said a word." Lars shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe he's just polite." Monica's tone tightened. "No one sits through that without complaining. You don't think it's weird. You gave him bread and water." "Monica," Lars replied, keeping his voice quiet. "That is weird." Monica rolled her eyes. "People like that, they're used to different standards." Lars didn't respond, but something in his posture changed. Julian's phone vibrated gently. "Layla, 9:06 a.m. We've confirmed Monica Delaney. 3 past customer complaints. 2 dismissed by HR. 1 mysteriously marked lost documentation." He replied without hesitation. "Julian attached to audit log. Add flight crew behavior overlay." He paused, then opened Skytrace's admin menu. With a fingerprint scan and a passcode, a hidden panel unlocked. A live security feed blinked onto the screen, grainy, black and white camera footage from the galley. Monica was clearly visible, gesturing animatedly. Her words weren't audible, but her face said enough. Julian toggled to cockpit comms. Static. Then, "I should have had him pulled before takeoff," said a low, gruff voice. "Captain Reed Morton." Julian exhaled slowly. That name wasn't unfamiliar. He'd flagged Morton months ago during internal merger due diligence. Multiple complaints about inappropriate comments. A formal warning buried by HR. And now, this. Back in the cabin, Monica returned with another tray, this one artfully arranged with salmon, roasted vegetables, and a petite dessert. She placed it in front of the white man in 2B with a sweet smile, then turned and walked straight past Julian's row. Nina blinked. "Enough." "Excuse me," she called out, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Monica turned. "Yes," Nina gestured. "Has this gentleman," she nodded toward Julian, "been offered a proper meal?" Monica's eyes narrowed for just a moment too long. Then came the saccharine smile. "We had limited options today." "Really?" Nina replied. "Because you just served filet mignon to him." She pointed toward the older man in 2D. "And salmon to her." She motioned behind her. Julian remained still, observing. Monica shrugged. "We assumed he wasn't interested." "Did you ask?" Nina pressed. Monica didn't answer. Behind them, murmurs began. Heads turned. One man pulled out his phone discreetly. Julian tapped his own screen. "Julian, 9:17 a.m. live feed. Upload segment. This meal fits you. Confirm camera angle. 2A. A moment later, Layla confirmed. Upload queued. legal reviewing timestamps. Then came the moment. A silver-haired man, 3 rows ahead, turned halfway in his seat. He looked Julian up and down, casually bold. "What do you do, young man?" he asked. "With all due respect, you don't look like a first-class regular." Julian tilted his head slightly. "I run a small aviation software firm." The man chuckled. "Startups?" he said, with a dismissive wave. "We get all types these days." Julian didn't blink. "True. All types." 20 minutes later, turbulence rocked the cabin lightly. Seatbelt signs chimed on. Monica returned to Julian's row. "Seatbelt. Now," she snapped, voice low but commanding. Julian clicked it in without a word. "Thanks for the reminder," he said evenly. As she walked away, Lars lingered behind. "I'm sorry," he murmured, eyes darting nervously. "I should have said something earlier." Julian looked at him, expression unreadable. "You still can." Lars swallowed hard and nodded. The captain's voice cut through the speaker. "This is Captain Morton. We're starting our descent into Washington, D.C. Clear skies. Local time is 12:47 p.m. Julian glanced at the clock on his tablet. Right on time. The screen flashed with a new message. Harper Legal, all footage backed up. Hashtags trending. Bread and Power just hit 500K tweets. Then another Layla. You want the crew detained for debriefing, security is ready. Julian typed yes. Escort Delaney, Morton, and any passive witnesses. I'll handle the rest. As the wheels touched down on the runway with a soft screech, the cabin erupted in polite claps. Julian didn't join. He sat still, composed, his tray untouched. Across the aisle, Nina opened her notebook. I'm guessing you're not just in software. Are you? She asked quietly. Julian gave a small smile. I build the systems that monitor every aircraft in this fleet, he said. This one included. Nina's lips parted slightly. So, they messed with the wrong passenger. Julian shook his head. They messed with the wrong culture. As the plane taxied to the gate, Monica returned one final time. This time, her hands trembled slightly. Mr. Cross, she said, her voice suddenly sweet. Would you care for champagne before deplaning, or perhaps a dessert? Julian met her gaze for the first time since boarding. No theatrics, he said calmly. What's done is done. The finality in his voice silenced her. She nodded stiffly and stepped away. The door opened. A private gate. 3 security officers stepped aboard. They walked directly to Julian. Mr. Cross, the lead officer said with professional courtesy, we're here to escort you and secure the named crew for questioning. Julian stood, retrieving his tablet. Please also bring the captain. Understood. As the officers approached the cockpit, Monica froze. She looked to Lars. This is bad, she whispered. Lars didn't answer. He was already walking toward Julian. Whatever happens, he said quietly, I'll give my statement. I saw everything. Julian nodded. That's a start. Outside the aircraft, 2 black SUVs waited. A PR rep, 2 legal counsel, and a journalist with a front row seat. As Julian stepped out of the plane, he exhaled deeply. The game had shifted, but the real move was just beginning. The conference room at the private terminal was built for diplomacy, not drama walls paneled in maple, recessed lighting, and a long mahogany table that once held champagne toasts and polished quarterly reports. But today, it felt colder. Julian Cross stepped inside, flanked by Harper and two legal advisors. Behind them, Nina Caldwell entered quietly, her press badge clipped discreetly to her lapel. She wasn't speaking yet, but her recorder was on. At the far end of the room sat Richard Vance, CEO of the airline. His tie was loosened, his smile already stretched too thin. Around him, a circle of executives looked like a jury preparing for its own trial. And at the side of the room, seated apart and flanked by corporate security, sat Captain Reed Morton, Monica Delaney, and Lars Chen. Monica looked pale. Reed was rigid, jaw clenched. Lars kept his hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed on the table. "Julian," Richard said, rising halfway, "I was informed there was an incident. If there's been some misunderstanding, I want to apologize on behalf of—" "There's no misunderstanding," Julian interrupted, his tone calm but iron-edged. He remained standing. What happened aboard Flight AX-84 wasn't a lapse in service. It was a culture problem. He set his tablet on the table. With a flick, the screen behind him lit up. Video played silent footage from the onboard security cameras. Claudia setting down the plate of bread and water, her expression, Julian's measured stillness, Monica's words, captured on a separate audio feed. "This meal fits you." A quiet wave of discomfort passed through the room. More clips followed. Reed's voice. "Should have pulled him before takeoff." Lars glancing away. Monica laughing in the galley. Passengers whispering assumptions. Silence from the crew. Each moment was time-stamped. Logged. Undeniable. Julian stepped closer to the crew. He didn't raise his voice. "Tell me," he said quietly, "if I hadn't sent that footage, if I weren't who I am, what would have happened when we landed?" No one answered. He turned to Monica. "You said, 'This meal fits you.' Why?" Her mouth opened, closed. "It wasn't meant how it sounded." Julian tilted his head. "How did it sound?" Monica swallowed hard. "It was a poor choice of words." Julian nodded once. "Yes, poor, calculated, and familiar." Then to Captain Morton. "You knew," Julian said. "You heard. You had history." Morton's voice came gravelly. "I didn't know you were—" "That's the problem," Julian said flatly. "You only care if someone is someone, not if they're someone worthy of respect." The silence pressed heavier than any turbulence. Richard Vance cleared his throat. "Mr. Cross, on behalf of the board, let me extend our deepest apologies. We'll handle this internally." "No," Julian said. "You won't." He picked up his tablet again and projected a set of documents. "These are the revised terms of our merger agreement. You'll notice a few changes." The executives leaned forward, eyes scanning line after line. Mandatory bias training for all flight staff. Anonymous flight audits conducted monthly. A new executive division, equity and passenger integrity, with direct reporting lines to Julian. And most notably, the authority to terminate any employee found responsible for discrimination without union arbitration if backed by verified evidence. "This is extreme," Richard said, his voice low. "This is necessary," Julian replied. "If I had recorded nothing, would any of you be sitting here right now?" No one responded. Harper stepped in smoothly. "We have legal precedents and public interest. The footage is already trending under 2 hashtags. Bread is not service and flying while black. Claudia and Morton are finished. one executive muttered under his breath. Julian turned to Lars. You stayed silent, but you came forward. Why? Lars took a breath. Because I couldn't live with it anymore. I've seen things, small things, but constant, and I let them slide. I didn't want to lose my job. Julian nodded. So you stayed comfortable in a broken system? Lars's voice cracked. Yes. Julian let that sit. Then, gently, what are you willing to do now? Lars straightened. Help fix it. From the inside, if you'll let me. Julian turned to the room. This isn't about revenge. It's about reform. You've built a culture that enables microaggressions, systemic bias, and silent complicity. I don't want an apology. I want accountability. He paused, his voice quiet, but clear enough to cut glass. I want never again to be more than a slogan. The executives signed, one by one. And when they didn't just authorize a merger. They authorized a transformation. Julian walked over to Monica, who hadn't moved. She looked up, tears starting to form. I didn't know who you were, she whispered. Julian shook his head. You knew exactly who I was. You just didn't think I mattered. He turned to Lars. Report to equity and passenger integrity. Starting Monday. Lars blinked. You're serious? Julian gave him a single nod. Everyone deserves a second chance, but don't waste it. As the room emptied, Nina approached. May I quote you? Julian glanced at her recorder. You already did. She smiled. But I'd like your words on the record. He considered. Then disrespect doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers in routine, in policy, in silence. And if we don't confront it, we carry it. Flight after flight, life after life. Nina scribbled furiously. Then Julian added, let's make sure that tray of bread and water becomes the last meal of a dying culture. Outside, the sky had shifted from gray to gold. As Julian stepped out into the sunlight, he wasn't just a CEO. He was a witness, a survivor, a reformer. And the lesson had landed, not just for Monica, not just for Reed, but for an industry. It was the day after the storm. Sunlight streamed through the high windows of Etherlink's Washington office, an open, minimalist space nestled in the heart of the city. The chaos of the previous day's confrontation had begun to settle, but the tremors still rippled through news cycles, corporate inboxes, and social media timelines. Julian sat in the quiet of his executive suite, coffee untouched, his thoughts miles above the city. The merger was finalized. The documents had been signed. His equity stake now gave him majority control of the newly formed EtherSky Alliance, a tech-driven airline initiative that would prioritize integrity, transparency, and fairness, not just in policy, but in culture. Yet despite the accomplishment, there was no sense of victory. There was only clarity. His phone buzzed again. Messages kept coming, support from fellow executives, letters from passengers, screenshots of posts going viral, the footage of Monica's words, "This meal fits you," had been shared over 10 million times. The image of Julian's untouched tray of bread and water had become a symbol. But not all messages were supportive. Some called him a troublemaker. Others accused him of playing the race card. A few mocked his calm demeanor, suggesting he should have grown thicker skin. He'd expected it. He welcomed it, even. Because the moment you start pulling back the curtain, Someone will always ask why you're trying to open a window in a room they're comfortable suffocating in. The knock at his door was soft. Harper stepped inside, tablet in hand. The internal audit team is already at work. Legal's reviewing all past discrimination claims logged over the last 5 years. We're starting with unresolved complaints. Julian nodded. Good. And the crew, Morton and Delaney, are formally terminated. Their records are being referred to the Department of Transportation for investigation. Lars submitted his onboarding paperwork. His new title, Equity Compliance Coordinator. Julian raised an eyebrow. Big title for someone who kept quiet. Harper gave a small smile. Big chance for redemption. He appreciated that. Because redemption, he believed, wasn't about apologies. It was about action. About staying after the shame and doing the hard work. That evening, Julian didn't head to a cocktail lounge or a boardroom dinner. He went somewhere quieter. A small charter school in Southeast D.C., a program partner of Etherlink's STEM mentorship initiative. Dozens of middle school students of color had gathered for a special guest talk. Most of them didn't know who Julian Cross was, beyond the name their teachers had mentioned with quiet pride. Julian stood before them in jeans, a navy sweater, and his usual stillness. I was told this is the generation that will build the future. He began. The room fell silent. He reached into his bag and pulled out a photo, the tray of bread and water. This, he said, holding it up, is what happens when people judge you before they know you. When they think dignity is something you have to earn. A few kids frowned. Some whispered. He continued. On a flight I took yesterday, this is what they served me. First class, full fare. And this was the meal I received. One hand shot up. Why? Julian didn't sugarcoat it. Because of how I looked. Because of what they assumed I wasn't. A girl in the second row tilted her head. What did you do? I documented it. Quietly. I gathered the truth. And then I used it. He paused. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I didn't fight back with fire. I fought back with proof. With calm. With presence. A boy raised his hand. Did you win? Julian smiled faintly. This wasn't about winning. It was about waking people up. Another hand. Are they sorry now? He nodded. Some are. Some aren't. But their excuses don't matter. Their behavior is what's changed. He let the room sit with that. Then, more gently. Sometimes, doing the right thing means sitting through the worst thing and still believing in something better. Back at his office that night, Julian sat by the window as the city lights blinked into life. Nina Caldwell's article had just gone live. Bread, water, and power, what one man's quiet rebellion taught an entire industry. Her words were sharp, sincere, and unflinching. She'd written not just about the flight, but about the system that enabled it. The small humiliations, the shrugged shoulders, the way privilege wore politeness while prejudice wore a smile. She hadn't made Julian a hero. She'd made him a mirror, and that mattered more. Later that week, Lars walked into the compliance office for his first day. He wore a simple blue shirt and a tie he hadn't straightened properly. His shoulders were tense, his voice cautious. Julian greeted him personally. You nervous? He asked. Lars nodded. Honestly, yeah. Julian offered a chair. Good. Nervous means you care. Lars sat down slowly. I know I can't undo what I didn't say on that flight. No, Julian said, but you can decide what you'll say next time. Lars met his eyes. I'll speak. Julian nodded. Then you've already begun. Outside the building, a mural was being painted on a nearby wall, an artist's interpretation of the story that had sparked a movement. At the center, a tray with a dry slice of bread and a glass of water. Above it, in bold strokes, dignity is not optional. Julian stood before it as the final brushstrokes went on. A stranger passing by recognized him. Mr. Cross, he said, extending a hand. Thank you for what you did. Julian took the hand. I didn't do it alone, he replied. And I didn't do it just for me. He looked up at the mural. I did it for every person who sat quietly, hoping the world would see them. In the end, Julian understood that real change isn't always dramatic. It doesn't always come with applause or headlines. Sometimes, it comes in a tray, a reminder of what we tolerate and what we refuse to accept ever again. A week later, Julian Cross boarded another flight. No cameras, no press, no statement, just a man walking calmly through the terminal, dressed in a Navy travel jacket, quiet shoes, and the same stillness he had worn in every room that ever underestimated him. This time, no one stopped him at check-in. No sideways glances, no questions about his seat, no sarcastic comments when he handed over his boarding pass. He walked through the first-class cabin of the newly rebranded Ether Sky Airlines, now outfitted with a diverse crew and revised service protocols. Every staff member had completed the new equity training. Every flight had an embedded observer, and every passenger, regardless of skin color, was being served with equal dignity. Julian took his seat in 1A. A smiling attendant, an older Latina woman with kind eyes, offered him a menu and a warm towel. Would you care for a beverage while we board? Sir, she asked. Julian nodded. Water will be fine. Thank you. She returned moments later with a chilled glass and crystal stemware, placed gently on his tray. There was no bread this time. But even if there had been, it wouldn't have meant the same. Because the system that once served it as an insult had now been forced to confront itself and to change. As the plane ascended through smooth skies, Julian gazed out the window. Below, cities folded into grids of light. The clouds parted like curtains drawn to reveal a stage where something invisible but powerful was still unfolding. A notification buzzed on his phone. It was a photo, sent by Nina Caldwell. The mural was finished. A tray of bread and water, painted in soft, solemn strokes. Behind it, a pair of hands open, steady, refusing to accept anything less than dignity. Beneath it, her article title had been stenciled, What They Gave Him Told a Story. What he did with it changed the ending. Julian stared at the image for a long moment. Then he smiled. Later, as the cabin lights dimmed, the attendant returned with his meal. Filet of salmon, lightly glazed vegetables, jasmine rice, and a small chocolate mousse. Would you like anything else, sir? She asked. Julian looked up, then down at the meal. No, he said, voice low but full of meaning. This will do. She smiled and moved on. He took one bite, then leaned back, closed his eyes, and breathed in the quiet. He wasn't just flying above the clouds now. He was flying in a world that, because of what happened on one flight, had been forced to see itself a little more clearly. He didn't need revenge. He didn't need applause. He just needed to know that the next time a child with brown skin sat in a seat 2A, they get more than a tray meant to shrink them. They'd get respect. Because someone, once, had said, "This meal fits you," and another man had replied, without raising his voice, "Not anymore." Sometimes, the loudest stand begins in complete silence. He didn't shout. He didn't cause a scene. He just sat there, in seat 2A, with a tray of dry bread and a plastic cup of water staring back at him. It wasn't about the food. It never was. It was about what it said. "You don't belong here." But instead of arguing, he took a photo. Instead of fighting, he documented. And instead of letting it go, he let it grow into evidence, into a story, into a movement. Because the truth is, real change doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes it wears patience and grace and quiet power. By the time that flight landed, the crew who had judged him were being judged by their own actions. The airline that thought it could overlook someone realized it had underestimated the wrong man. He didn't ask for revenge. He asked for respect. And in doing so, he gave a voice to everyone who had ever been treated as less. So next time someone hands you less than you deserve, don't break. Document. Speak. Change the ending. Because sometimes bread and water is the beginning of a revolution.